Hi, my name is Dave Lappin, and obviously work here at the Home Society. We want to talk to you today about a young man by the name of Darren. Darren is someone that Cam and I have both known since 1988 when we worked for another agency in Burnaby here in British Columbia. And Darren is a young man that had a pretty typical story in the sense that he grew up for the most part with his family, a nice loving family that were very, very involved. Darren had some pretty difficult challenges in school and at home for the first years of his life. When he was about 12, he ended up going into foster care. Mom and Dad had two other kids to raise, and they just weren't able to give Darren the kind of supports that he needed, and it became very difficult for the other children as well. And Darren was a pretty high energy young man, and it was deemed that maybe a ranch would be a good place for Darren to burn off some energy and be able to be creative and very active out on the farm. Unfortunately, things turned very bad fairly quickly for Darren on the farm. He was abused quite severely, where they used a horse whip on him, and there's some pretty nasty photos of the damage that was done to Darren, and that was difficult for him, and his ability to trust and be with people, I think, was really compromised at that point. That was really, I think, a turning point for Darren. But in 1988, when I was first introduced to Darren, we didn't really know how to support people who were really, really challenging. There was a real push to close the institutions in 1988 here in British Columbia, and so there was a real influx of folks coming into the community, maybe returning to their communities, or for many, the first time in a community. And we, in our wisdom, or maybe lack of in those days, often put four very difficult, what's termed challenging folks together in the same home, and often hoped for the best, and very often the best wasn't very good. And Darren was one of those folks that kind of got caught in that constant flux of moving and roommates, and roommates that had their own very special and unique needs. And we spent a lot of time trying to plan for Darren, mostly how to control Darren. He was very impulsive and would lash out at people suddenly and without much warning. Caregivers, people in the community, his roommates. And I said we spent a lot of time planning on how to manage Darren, and had no conversations about how to keep Darren safe, how to keep him engaged, and how to make Darren feel loved. No conversations about those things. It was always the next, how do we cope with, how do we manage, how do we control. So Darren went through a series of moves where he went from one home to another, one community to another, different roommates, different caregivers. And actually, in those days, probably different staff, because that's kind of how we did things then. Darren went into an institution here in British Columbia for a med review, and it was fairly successful. Darren spent about 3 months there and came out and did reasonably well. But once again, life got difficult for Darren. He was able to, for a period of time, attend a day program and walked himself back and forth to that day program for a little while. And then again, things began to become very challenging for Darren and the people around him, for his roommates. Violence increased, self-harm increased, difficulties with neighbors. In those days, I want to say it was a bit of almost the Wild West in how we were supporting folks. We held doors closed for people that were extremely violent, that were going after their roommates. There weren't a lot of guidelines on how to keep people safe. I'm not suggesting that people were physically abused, but doors being held closed to keep people safe. And Darren was a pretty creative, very strong young man, and he at times would create holes in doors to crawl through, or come through gyprock from one room to the next. And he ended up going back into this institution for a med review. And I'm sad to say that he was there for 8 years. His life became very restricted, less and less people, where he was able to tolerate less and less people in his life, to the point that I believe for a long period of time there was one fellow by the name of Neil that could support Darren in this institution. His family stayed very involved, and he looked forward to their visits, as difficult as they were for the family, because at this point Darren was essentially naked most of the time, isolated from everyone else, smearing feces, hurting himself, hurting others. The institution where he was staying ran out of ideas of how to support him and began to throw a lot of money into the situation. They spent $150,000 renovating what they called Darren's suite. It essentially blocked him off from the rest of the institution and allowed them to keep him behind plexiglass where they could observe him, where they could put meals in place, but essentially he was alone. They installed some very high-tech fans to blow the feces smell out, because Darren was, as I said, naked and smearing most of the time. They would go in, they'd get him out into an open area once or twice a week and go in with 3 or 4 guys and hoses and literally hose the place down and squeegee the stuff outside. And the place just smelled very strongly of either feces or a combination of feces and bleach or some really strong commercial industrial strength cleaning agent. So it was not a pleasant place to be. It was around this time that we left, both Cam and I left the association we were working for at the time, and were involved in the beginnings of Home Society, and got to meet John McGee, which is a real turning point for ourselves and everyone that we've encountered since then. And we were able to introduce John to Darren, and John had that very magical way of being with people, and Darren accepted him instantly. And whenever John was in town, which in those days was probably 2 or 3 times a year in the early days of the Home Society, always went and visited with Darren, and they were always very successful visits. His family were still heavily involved. They brought food for Darren at least once or twice a week, and those are the only real highlights of Darren's days. He was alone the rest of the time, and as I said, naked. We were asked at this point if we could support him, if the Home Society could begin to support Darren. It was quite a daunting challenge. We were quite fearful, but confident that under John's mentorship we would find a way to keep Darren safe, and the people that supported Darren, and get him back into the community. The first year he came out, he moved into a home that was a purpose-built home from the early days of the Home Society, that was intended to be able to take a bit of a beating, that was very, very well constructed. Darren had an amazing skill at finding those weaknesses and dismantled much of the home, but not in a way that was hurtful or harmful. He was quite proud. He would find a seam in the floor that he could pick at and would pull it up and be quite proud of his handiwork. And we often talked that Darren's great skill was showing us the weak points of our homes for future reference the next time we were building homes. But the first year that Darren was with us was similar to the institutional years in that he was naked a lot, and he still was smearing, but he was with people that were kinder, that consciously wanted to spend time with Darren, and he began to accept folks into his life, and people could spend time. There was a couple of us that could go in and get Darren out in the van and go for a drive, and a drive through McDonald's and get a hamburger. But those are very trying times for Darren. And then he would often return from those and spend 2 or 3 hours raging, ripping his clothes up, naked, smearing again. One of the things we're very fortunate with Homes is we contract with a psychiatrist that's able to see our folks on a regular basis. Now, the typical scenario for folks in the community is they might see a psychiatrist 3 or 4 month waiting period to get in, and then maybe every 6 weeks or 2 months after that, if they're fortunate. We've been able to contract with a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Legaspi, who worked in the institutions here in British Columbia and is very familiar with a lot of the people that we're asked to serve. And she knew Darren, knew him for a very, very long time. While Darren was in the institution, he developed some illness around meds, and they determined that perhaps a neuroleptic malignancy is what they called it. And in fact, they determined that he couldn't be on any medications, and he went days and days without sleeping, or he might sleep for an hour or 20 minutes here, 15 minutes there. So aside from the challenges that life brought Darren, he was also not sleeping. Dr. Legaspi did a lot of research, was able to look back, pull medical records, illnesses, and slowly began to introduce some meds into Darren's life, essentially to help him sleep. And he began to sleep 3 hours here, 4 hours there, and then it was 5 and 6 hours. Life changed for Darren at that point, where he was getting regular sleep. He had folks like Dawn in his life in the group home that were able to make that real conscious connection to be with Darren. So that was significant, and he's not on an amazing amount of medications at this point, essentially still some sleep aids. Darren began to display some OCD type behaviors, some rituals that were very difficult for him to shake. And we'd learned with some other folks we served that a change of location with the same caregivers, so that there were that continuity, people felt safe in the new home. They were able to leave a lot of their rituals and OCD behaviors behind. They often created new ones, but they were less restrictive, and they were able to leave some of those more difficult and challenging things behind. So we attempted that with Darren, and there was a couple of caregivers that were involved with Darren, one by the name of Dawn, another by the name of Keith, and we moved Darren to a different home. It was another purpose-built home, and almost immediately there was a change. Darren was able to spend more time clothed, very connected to Dawn and Keith, and they were able to mentor the rest of the team on how to be with Darren, how to talk slowly with Darren, and sort of go at Darren's pace. There was one caregiver in particular that Darren really grew attached to by the name of Dawn. And Dawn just had a way. He was a bigger fella in terms of he was tall and slender, but he spoke calmly and slowly, and he carried himself in a way that was reassuring to everyone, just had a presence that made everyone around him feel safe, and Darren really became attached to Dawn. And Dawn was a very, very strong advocate in finding new ways to support Darren. In always, every meeting, every conversation around Darren was led by, what can we do to make Darren feel more safe? What can we do to make Darren feel more safe and loved by us? So he was very much a leader in getting Darren back to a life and with people that truly cared about him. Darren liked and loved Dawn so much that when Dawn wasn't there, it became a bit of a struggle, where he was constantly looking for Dawn and asking for Dawn. And upon Dawn's return from a couple of days off, or if he worked a 7 to a 3 and wasn't back till the next day, Darren was very anxious and so happy and relieved to see Dawn. Got to the point where Dawn was spending more and more time at the home, away from his own family, but spending quality time with Darren. And Darren's life was so much better when Dawn was involved. We talked to Dawn about his family and how they felt about the time that he'd spent away. And Dawn has a very lovely family, a wife, and at the time 2 young teenage boys. And they missed Dawn a lot, but they understood what he was doing and why he was doing it. And the conversation shifted to, could Darren live with them in their home? And that seemed like a completely off-the-wall question at the time. But I guess Dawn had a family that understood Dawn, and they were very similar to him in their beliefs that everybody deserves a good quality life, and they opened their home to Darren. So as we approached the family about possibly sharing their home with Darren, they had a lot of discussion, and I think they realized that they'd probably see more of Dawn if Darren was in their home rather than Dawn constantly being over at Darren's. And so we looked for a home that might work for the family, and it was we found a home on a farm just a little east of Abbotsford. Very lovely home on some acreage, walk-in home, so you walk in on the main floor, and Darren has a place set up there, and we had to do some renovations, had to reinforce walls because Darren still struggled a little bit. There were days when we needed that reinforcement. Created a special shower for Darren. The family spent a lot of time with Darren in that space in the early days. He wasn't comfortable yet. This was a brand new space, and so they spent a lot of time. They ate meals with Darren downstairs. They shared time with Darren. He began to slowly feel safe enough that he ventured out into the rest of the house, and they watched hockey games together and ate popcorn together, shared meals, did things that families do. So this really was a really typical family. Dawn and his wife, and at the time 2 young teenage boys. A very big, rambunctious, energetic dog that took an instant liking to Darren, and surprisingly enough, Darren took a liking to the dog. And they're best buddies, and it's really neat to see them interacting together. They have a horse on the farm, they have goats, they have a garden, so Darren's actively involved in feeding the horses and the goats and doing the gardening, gets eggs. Darren's family, his biological family, have stayed connected. They're elderly now, they have their health concerns, so they don't visit like they did. They live in Vancouver, but they're in regular phone contact with the family. They went through many, many years of fighting for Darren to get him out of the institution, fighting for Darren to be safe, to have people around him that understood him. They now say, you know what, he's safe, and they're pulling back a little bit, often, mostly to do with age and their own illness, but they're very clear that they're at rest, they're at peace, that Darren is now safe, that Darren has a good life, and that should anything happen to them, Darren's in good hands. And it's quite a story to have known Darren since 1988 to now, and seen the hard life that he's worked through, the effort that he has put in. And he's a kind, loving man with a wonderful smile, who loves to hug, who's excited to see people. And given the hand that he'd been dealt, I think that's a testament to his strength and his enduring character. Don and his family have been amazing. Everything they do is about Darren. They plan family trips, they plan outings, they plan anything is around Darren first, Darren first. And he has a life that reflects that, and we're very fortunate to have Don and his family involved, and things are different for Darren today. Anyway, Gabby, thanks for sitting down to talk to us for a couple of minutes about your experience and your life with supporting Darren, and how that started and where it's at now. So I think initially Don had spent so much time away from home and doing extra hours and extra shifts on days off in the group home with Darren that you didn't see much of him. So Don began to bring Darren home and meet the family. How did that go, the initial introductions and the time with your sons?
Well, since Don started working with Darren at the group home, he made a connection with Darren, and he would come home and talk about Darren all the time, about his sad story and how his life has been a little bit of a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. And so by word we knew Darren, and mm-hmm. We kind of empathize about him and the story, and it's a sad story, and so we get to know him personally, and he to me was a very sweet kid. Mm-hmm. And so when the idea of the proposal to have Darren join our family, it didn't seem that odd. It was mm-hmm. kind of like let's give it a try. And already Don with him had an amazing relationship, yes. And so it was just a matter of time and patience, and mm-hmm. Let him flourish, right? Yeah. And so we did, and there were some little challenges at the very beginning. Everything new, but he was so excited, and yes. We immediately welcomed him. He always, I didn't see how he was in the past. Mm-hmm. I've just heard the stories, but I just saw a very sweet individual with lots of potential, and I just felt that he needed a lot of love and care.
When Darren first came into your home, your two sons, Oliver and Alan, how old were they when he first came into the home?
They were about 16, 18, mm-hmm. and they were so excited. And again, Alan made a connection right away with Darren. Oliver too, being a young and Darren, he was so excited to have these new brothers. Yes. Yeah. He'll come and hug them, and Alan, and so excited, we'll bring this for you, and I help, and he wanted just to be included. Yeah. And that's how the whole integration started, with just including him. And he at the beginning was living in the ground floor with Alan, sharing the room, the space, really nice space downstairs. But immediately Don realized that if we needed to be a kind of a family. And included, that'd be right at the beginning, mm-hmm. just to have him included in everything. So we did, and he's part of our family. It's really neat.
One of the wonderful surprises, I guess, surprise because it happened so quickly for us, is how he so much became attached to you, Gabby. Right. I'm not sure that there's been that many. There has been some, but not many strong females in his life, just due to often the stories attached to Darren, but You know, he loves his mom dearly and has really been separated from her for a very, very long time. And you're clearly, you know, the matriarch of the family, and your sons and Dawn in every good household, you know, to mom. And
Yes.
Darren very much became a part of that quickly, and it was really pleasantly surprising to us how attached he is and how quickly that happened.
He is. We thought it was going to take time, and you know, all the time that it was necessary, but you know, just the understanding that he needed a home, and being included and being supported, and just treat him just as equal as like my other son, you know, like my other sons. So and I think that says a lot about how he feels comfortable and happy and included, and you can see, you know him from before, so you can see how he is now, and I think he's in a good space and a good place.
I spoke a little bit earlier about how, you know, a lot of what we do is making people attempt to make people feel safe and loved. One of the byproducts, or again unexpected results, is how safe I think his parents now feel. They were in constant touch in years past, whether it was with the institutions or with us, constantly checking in and ensuring things, and they've really made a conscious effort to say it's okay, we're letting go, that we know that he's safe now. And they're a pretty special family in their ability to do that, and they love you guys a lot.
Oh, yes. Yes, we have communications, and just to reassure them that he's doing well, and you know, they're concerned as, you know, their son, but they'll rest assured he's in good hands, and he's happy, and that's all that matters, that he's happy, he's living a good life, and he's free to do. We live in a farm with my husband Don and Alan, and our dog Boss. We have a horse and chickens and sheep and all that Darren likes. And my other son, he doesn't live at home now. He's at university at UBC, but he comes home every you know, every month, in a weekend, stay sometime, and we just gather all together and have a good time. And Darren is our other son. Yes.
Well, I think that's the missing piece for so many years of Darren's life, that he wasn't really a part of anything, and there was a lot of things created to contain Darren and to manage Darren, and it wasn't until he actually became a part of something. And he contributes. When I come out to visit, what I really enjoy is seeing Darren's contribution to things, that you guys aren't waiting on him hand and foot. He's participating. He's a contributing member of the family.
Always, yes. And we go shopping, and he knows where to go, and all the people in the community, we go, he loves shopping. He knows people by name. He always asks, what's your name? And they tell, and then he remembers. He has an amazing memory. And but he reminds us what's needed in the house.
Oh, nice.
And you know, I'll carry this, you carry that. So participation is very important to him. Like, he's absolutely the same as everybody else, and we appreciate that.
You know, you spoke about his really strong memory, and he remembers names and people, and it's a great gift, but it also inspires us that how strong he is, because he also remembers the difficult times and the bad things that have happened to him over his life, and yet he still finds forgiveness and trust. So that's very inspiring for us to see. It gives us hope for others that we serve, that in the right place with the right people,
absolutely,
they can thrive and have good lives.
Yes. And Don and him, they're like good buddies. We go everywhere together. When I'm not with them, Don and him, they just handle everything at home and do the, you know, everyday activities, and we have a good time together.